All right, then I think good morning for the US folks. I'm not sure, Mario, what's the time there, but probably like afternoon or maybe evening, and definitely in India, good evening.
Yep, same
Um,
here, 5 p.m.
yeah. So thanks everyone for joining this fire chat. And before I introduce this, I just want to talk about what's this about, what we are going to discuss, and then Mario and Shobit, I think you will be probably individually going to be a better person to discuss about your own profile, and then we can kickstart that. The reason we are popping on this fire chat because we are seeing a plenty of reports filled with a lot of outdated low-hanging fruits, and that's probably is wasting a lot of time for our developers, time for the security leaders, in fact, the Pentester team and the companies as well. And that's actually eroding the whole trust in the security process. Like the moment people see the report, which is not really making sense, then eventually those reports and findings is actually called out. So that's where we want to talk about that. We want to talk about the vulnerabilities that not really belongs to the report or not really a serious issue to be reported based on the business use cases. And yes, we are going to talk more from the context perspective here. So today's conversation is about to raising the bar in the pen testing report, and we should stop reporting such vulnerabilities, whether it's matters or not. We will discuss whole thing with full clarity. So let's kick off this. Mario, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself, and then after Shobit, you can take over.
Awesome. Thank you very much. My name is Mario. I'm the founder and director of Cure53, which is a Berlin, Germany-based pen testing firm. And while I was a pen tester myself long ago, I'm not a pen tester anymore, but mostly do admin work. But I still know a little bit of that stuff. So I'm hoping to be able to contribute here and look forward to this fireside chat a lot.
Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Shobhit. I currently work as I have dual role at Headspace. I'm the chief of staff for the CISO, where I'm responsible for budgeting, mentorship to individuals in cloud, IT, and security teams. And then I also serve as the director of security and compliance. So I report to the CISO and ensure that whenever we receive a pen test report and whenever we have to conduct a pen test, essentially I am the individual reaching out to those folks and asking for their credentials, their expertise in the tech stack that we have, and just doing the due diligence when we are finalizing the pen test company that we're going to engage with. So that's a brief about my current role. Prior to that, I worked for a number of financial institutions, um, institutions as large as 100,000 employees, and companies which were like 10 individuals in the security team.
Wow, that's amazing. Thanks, Mario and Shobit. I think that's really good one. Um, I know. I think this topic is going to be a fire on session. So and there are a lot of points to be discussed here. Uh, I'm not really sure where to start, but on top of my mind, specifically for this is for Mario, right? Mario, do you recall any of the finding in the pen test report that made you go, okay, why this specific issue is being in the report on the first place?
It depends, of course.
I mean,
Like
let's start
there
with
are
um,
oftentimes findings where you would wonder, why do we have this in the report? Is this just like stuffing the turkey, just like
yeah.
material to produce more pages? Or does this have actual value? And in some situations, it depends on your viewpoint. Like if you're like a pen tester or working in red teaming or something comparable, you might discard this as something that is like useless. But maybe for someone else in a different position, looking over a different team or a different product or a different context, it might be valuable. And maybe it's also something that is not even just valuable, but also necessary for compliance reasons. Long story short, those tickets exist, but it's sometimes not easy to differentiate whether this is really a trash ticket that no one needs, that is just like stuffing material, or whether it has some kind of form of value somewhere down the line. And lots of context is needed to actually know that.
Right. So you mentioned like context. Do you remember any of the context which doesn't really make sense in the report specifically, Mario?
I mean, we often probably have seen tickets that complain about the autocomplete on, autocomplete off, or something like this in a web form. And that would be something where it's really, really, really hard to find a rationale that tells people, hey, this is an actual security vulnerability. And if you go down the line and try to find out why this ticket actually exists, you might understand that indeed compliance was the reason, and some standards that at some point were relevant and maybe still are forced testers to access particular ticket, because if it wasn't in there, then the report would be incomplete. Or a scanner would be set to detect something like this and then automatically produce that ticket. But that would be one of my candidates where I'm thinking like, hey, do we really need this? Have we ever needed this? When was there ever a time when someone exploited this particular thing and got places with it? I would guess as far as to never did this ever happen. But we don't know. Like, it's hard to say without having the full insight and the full context.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I totally agree with you. But, um, sometimes, I also accept some of those tickets. But the moment it goes to customer, right, they will start thinking about the credibility. Like, what this auto or maybe any of the vulnerability issues, that not really making sense to my business. Why should I have that? So Shobit, have you seen that, your business is accepting such a reports or vulnerabilities at all? Like Mario is talking about some of the vulnerabilities which doesn't really make sense, but do you accept in your report? And I believe you, Headspace is also quite running a lot of, bug bounty programs and pen testing and all that stuff, right? So how do you see that?
That definitely diminishes the credibility of the report, Sandeep. Of course, if the pen tester is reporting in the initial report, then we do try to make sure that they have all the context and they understand the business logic. One of the things that I often see is this is when I first joined Headspace. In my first week, I was reviewing all the artifacts from the last pen test, and I observed two things. First is we had findings which were repeated in the report itself. Same report, there was one very benign finding, and just like Mario mentioned initially, there just for the sake of lengthening the report or the duration, like the length of the report, they report the same finding but in a different page, which doesn't make sense. Why would you want to do report the same finding in a different page, which is exactly the same? And then secondly, there are many business logic issues that I see. For example, on the Headspace application, if you go right now, you will be able to create an account, but you will not be able to access any of the meditations if you don't put your credit card number. And we have that in the back end that, hey, if you don't put your credit card number, we have certain pipelines built in which will automatically delete your account. However, we often receive this finding, bug bounty program or the pen testers that, hey, somebody can do a spamming attack, and then they will be creating account from legitimate IDs, and then those users will try to create the account. They won't be able to create the account, which is not true, because if we somebody is trying to log in with my account or create an account with my account, and if I don't put my credit card information, we have the pipelines built in to delete the account automatically within 24 hours. So I'm not sure how that comes into being, but I often see things like that which are not useful to us, and they're still being reported every time we do a pen test.
Oh, Shobit, I think that point is really making sense here. But Mario, do you agree with that? Like, is that because of like pentesters don't have the knowledge, or like why they are doing this? Like, or maybe why some vulnerability should come in picture when the application business is something different?
Mm. I wouldn't frame it on knowledge alone. I think it's like a complex thing, and it's like we can maybe simplify it by using the term maturity of a tester. So let's assume you're like a very young tester starting in the company for the first time, doing your first pen tests, and you just don't have the skill set or the understanding yet or the expertise yet to find like cool bugs like your peers would do. But you need to kind of produce something because you're scared about your reputation, you're scared about your job, etc., etc. And then any bug counts, like anything that you can produce counts. And in that situation, maybe you would be submitting something or reporting something that would otherwise never be reported. Or if you had like more maturity, like 5 years plus, 10 years plus, 15 years plus, you would never report this. But in
Right.
that situation, in that vulnerable position that you're in, it might be kind of seemingly the right thing to do. So at the end of the day, maybe it's just compliance, maybe it's just like less missing knowledge, but maybe it's also something far more complex that is also tied to the personal situation of the tester, etc., etc. So again, it can quickly get complicated and you never really know. But what you should do is always speak to those testers and just like tell them, look, you don't have to kind of work based on mass. You would rather work based on class and put something into the report that is actually good. And it's fine to not have anything in the report. If you don't find anything, then you didn't find anything, and that's okay. Like sometimes testers don't find something, and that is nothing to be ashamed of. So taking all this into consideration, I think it's a complex thing to judge and might have to do with the tester and other circumstances as well.
Oh, wow, I think uh, the last line, that's really a great line that you mentioned. If you don't find vulnerabilities, it's okay. You haven't find it. That means your application is doing really good. You can, maybe you can talk to customers saying, okay, your application security posture is doing really good because of X, Y, Z points. And that's where, like, I'm really confident that you might not able to find these vulnerabilities unless you're making some sort of a changes in that particular pages or web page or any web app or anything like that. That's really makes sense here. um, but in that case also, like, Shobit, have you seen such a reported which is like, bloated, like, there are plenty of things that's been added, just like Mario mentioned, right? If you don't find anything, you start pushing a lot of data to the report. Have you seen those like bloated report or maybe any bounty report in that case?
All the time, Sandeep, all the time. And I
What's your
mentioned
reaction?
initially, what was that?
What's your reaction? What's your reaction usually?
It definitely, the first thing that comes to mind is it diminishes the credibility of the company. When this is before I joined the company, so we had another individual who had some pen test company to the pen test, and when I saw the pen test for the first time, it definitely, my first instinct was I'm never going to work with this company again.
Oh,
That was my first instinct. That
right.
the reports, the findings were so benign, it doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to work with this company again. And to make sure that we don't do the same mistake again, what I started doing is something that I called audit the auditor, which
Oh,
is coming from my background in the audit. That right now, when we go to the pen test company, we don't just look at their sample reports, which is often the case. We also look at the credentials of the pen testers. That okay, is this person certified? Have they conducted pen tests in the past for the similar tech stack? We are a mobile application, which is in iOS, Android, Apple Pay. We also have a web application. Do we have different pen testers who will be working on all these different applications, because every pen tester has their own set of niche, or will be having just one or two pen testers who will be testing everything. So I kind of look at it from that lens as well, that let's audit the pen testers a little bit more, ask them thorough questions, make sure that they do truly understand the logic of the application. And when they do conduct the pen test report findings, it's worthwhile and not something that they reported just for the sake of lengthening the report.
right. So I think you said audit the auditor. It's like
Yeah,
watching the watchers. So
correct.
yeah, but Mario, like, isn't that the culture problem from the pen testing company the moment you see such, vulnerabilities where customer like Shobit has to spend a lot of time on report figuring out whether it's a really good ticket or bad ticket? What do you say?
I think it's perfectly fine if a client or customer decides to have a close look at the pentest team that is going to work with them in the future for many or for just like one project. And I'm a strong proponent of A, having a thorough interview before every test, B, sending out tester bios so to make sure that the customer knows and the client knows who's actually going to test their applications, and also give them the possibility to verify that really those people are on the test that were advertised as to be on the test. And also to make sure that you frequently change your security company or have multiple security companies in your roster, so to make sure that you can compare them, that they can compete, that you can see who performs better, who sometimes have weaknesses or strengths, and also who from their teams respectively is most suited for your scope. Because it could also be that you have someone on the scope who's like great with lots of other things but not for your application, but another person from the same team would be great with your application but maybe not for other things. So at the end of the day, it all comes down to managing human resources, just with this little extra portion of spice that is infosec pen testing and managing the whole thing.
Right. But even after those kind of filters, interviews, everything, in the place, what if Shobit, you get such reports and you eventually like, feel like, okay, this really makes sense. Now you should pass it to the developer. And the moment it goes to the developer, they come back with, saying, okay, our business don't want this because it's our requirement. How do you react to that, like, after spending ton of time?
That was one of the major mistakes I did, Sandeep, that in the past, whenever I received a pen test report, I took the report, created Jira tickets, assigned the developers from each squad, and the developers were like, this is not really a finding. And I was very early in my career at the time. So what I have devised right now at Headspace is when we receive a report, of course, the pen testers or the report has the proof of concept into it. However, we do know that many of those pen test findings are not applicable to our company or our business. And we essentially do a POC on our end as well. We try to make sure that whatever findings are being reported in the pen test, our application security lead, he goes and tries to replicate the same findings. And if we don't find those findings affecting or impacting our business, then we reach out to the pen tester and we ask them to change the severity and have a conversation before even reaching out to the development team. That actually does two things. First, many times the developers, the pen testers don't understand the business logic, and for that reason, they mark something as higher critical. More often than not, it's information or low. So we try to make sure that we represent the findings in the right light. And secondly, when we do go to the development team, we are absolutely certain that this is going to impact our business and the priority that we have decided is absolutely correct. So those are some of the key things that we do even before we reach out to the development. So
Right.
that has really played well in the past 2 years for us, where we have findings, we validate, and then we reach out to the development team, or the pentest team is advised. I also come to Mario's point where he mentioned that more often than not, it so happens that the maturity of the pen tester is like they just want to report. And we have seen often the case that there was a junior pen tester in the team and they report something, and then we reach out to them, and the senior pen tester is like, oh no, this is not really finding, it's our bad. So I agree with Mario's point there, where you don't really need to just accept everything that you're getting as a business. You should always question and make sure that you have the lead pen tester acknowledge everything that's in the report before you accept it.
Yeah, I think I totally get that, and I think the audience, probably you also agree with this. I'm not sure. If not, then you can definitely ask questions. Shobit and Mario, we will not find them alive again. Probably like you should ask as many as possible question here. Maybe like let's go to the level two of the Bennett. Okay, so we talked about okay, what are the vulnerabilities which is not really making sense here, and what happens if those get submitted. So it's completely, I can say there is a complete waste of time, possibly like from the pen testers and the company as and everyone, right? Spending a ton of money on that, and they are not paying for such bad vulnerabilities. What let's get into some of the situation. When I was discussing one of my client, they actually serve to educational system, and they have a really good application, and which is globally known application, uh, and they don't have password complexity policy just because they have students to log in. So they're straightforward. They are saying, okay, my student can't recall these passwords, so we don't care passwords. And eventually, the even if someone tried to hack into that, they'll not find anything. Maybe they will not have any access to that. That's what they're saying. So in that case, Mario, what do you think about this? The password complexity for the student application, does that really make sense as a like the security leader in the industry? Do you want to force that customer specifically to have that things? But on parallel, you also think about the nest is saying, okay, password, it's not really the case that you have.
Well, I mean, we can maybe see this more holistically and think about passwords. Do we still need them? And lots of people thought about this already. And we can probably agree that passwords alone, on their own, are something that should be a thing from the past. So, if that is the case, if we already structurally know that we need to use something stronger, better, and more reliable than passwords, then why would we beat around on that and criticize that the password complexity is not high enough? Because the whole system is bad. If there's only password, then we don't need to criticize that the password complexity is not enough. But we should rather advise that it is necessary to add something else with passkeys or with proper two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, or anything else that is available to us right now. it's effectively criticizing that the steam engine is a little bit too loud. If we could make it more quiet, if we look at this from like an example or like a symbolistic point of view. So I would rather criticize the fact that they rely on passwords and passwords only than to go into the nitty gritty and tell them that the passwords that they accept are very short and allow for like easy brute forcing.
What's your take on Shobit? Like, I really like the way Mario just mentioned, but think from that shows maybe the student who don't have even access to phones, they are like little kids. How do you see that?
Yeah, I'll continue with Mario's point. Totally understand that passwords in themselves are not the right control for somebody to log in. From the business standpoint, I would perhaps ask a different question that, okay, what's the application that the students are logging in? What's the criticality of that application? In this particular instance, if the application is hosting only the schedule for the summer camp and
Yeah.
only the syllabus for the next semester, then it's perhaps okay that, okay, we don't have any password complexity and they just need the information for those in summer camps or syllabus. In this case, it's okay not to have password complexity, and they can have just like a 6 character password. If I see that it's not going to make an impact to the application, it doesn't have any PII, it doesn't have any confidential information, not degrading information. So in that case, it would be fine. But ultimately, I think it's on the business as well. If they do decide that for some reason they decide to accept this as a risk that they're willing to accept, then I would probably be okay with it, given the students are aware, the teachers are aware that this is something that we are going to do. Secondly, the first was the criticality, and then secondly, what are compulsory controls that they have in place? Do they, for example, if they log into the application with that individual password, but to see the grade, if they have to enter another like confidential information, or like Mario mentioned, if they have to have like biometric or something as a multi-factor authentication, then it kind of changes the narrative of the finding. And I would probably have that as an informational, not just as higher critical. And NIST also mentions that you don't necessarily need to have password complexity at this point of time, because we see the human behavior is such that not even kids, but adults are not really good at remembering passwords. So if we follow that guidance from NIST and if we take the business logic or the application scope, then perhaps I would have different answers to those questions.
Oh,
I fully agree
question.
with you, and I would like to add that the question should always be like, how do you recommend something that is at the end of the day best for the users and their security? And it could very much well be that in some contexts, a simple, non-complex password is in fact the best thing that you can do because you don't know what other context needs to be considered. Um, and then you need to just go with this because you also need to consider what happens if the password has been entered 3 times the wrong way. Is it just like a PIN?
Yeah,
Will it be disabled? Will the account be frozen or something like this? What else will happen in the back end? What else will happen in the process? How would you recover the password and so on? So I think that the password complexity is just like one tiny Lego brick in a huge building. And we cannot judge it by just looking at that particular aspect, but need to consider more.
right,
Oh
right.
yeah,
The
I
other
agree.
day, I mean, yesterday itself, I was looking at one of the vendor docs, and they had those as a gatekeeper docs. They don't want everybody to see their API configuration and whatnot. I shoot them a note, and they have just one password for everybody. That hey, you can just put the name of the company with the asterisk, and you'll be able to see the documents behind the offer the API. So that's another instance, Sandeep and Mario, where they didn't feel the need to have a complex password or a PIN. They just thought that, okay, we'll just have the name of the company with an asterisk and it should be good enough for the information that they wanted to share.
I mean, this is funny. Like you mentioned, right? There is default password asterisk and the year. And one of the organization, the moment I tried to search that keyword asterisk, I found all of their password in Google. So, that kind of a by default passwords are even available in the market. But, nowadays, love at the rate 123 is not acceptable by NIST and everyone, like, even the students. That's definitely, I agree. Audience, like, if you have such situation and if you understood this use case, do you also think that the Mario and the Shobit's thinking the same way? You can challenge us, you can post as many as possible questions there. We can try to, answer one by one. If there are any questions, LinkedIn folks can ask on the comment. A few of us Secure 7 folks are there to monitor that. Even on the Zoom, you can ask as many as possible questions here. I really love this. Let's get into maybe a little technical here. Um, Mario, have you seen any of this report which is busted with the just version disclosure, but it's not really exploitable?
We've seen this, of course. We don't produce them ourselves, but I've seen it, and I would say that in a vast percentage of cases, this is an empty calorie ticket. But maybe it's not in some specific context. But in most situations, that is something that doesn't really get you any places. And we don't report those unless we have the feeling that it really adds value because of a very special context that might be very typical to the tested application.
Right. And usually those contexts, what I feel like, if you're reporting that version, probably like, is that version is specifically vulnerable to some exploit and that's publicly available and widely exploitable. Is
True,
that
but I mean, if that is the case, and you have a web application that is available against a very specific exploit, and that is available publicly, and the version headers give that away, even if they didn't give it away, why would the attacker be stopped by not having this information disclosed? So the attacker would probably just like send a bunch of requests over there and see if it works. Because if there's no version disclosure, then they would have to try, and that takes them half a second. And if there is a version disclosure, then they don't have to try, and they save half a second. So at the end of the day, I don't think it adds anything, which kind of gets us back to the question again: does it help anyone if you report this? Is it of value to anyone? Does it help the users? Does it help the platform? Who is being helped if that recommendation is actually implemented? And if the answer is not super sure, maybe no one, then maybe don't report the ticket in the first place.
right? Makes sense. Shobit, do you want to add anything on top of this?
Fully agree with Mario. I don't think I can add anything to what Mario mentioned here. Yeah.
Right. Cool. I think there's one question here. Is the OOPS top 10 enough in today's environment? Is it better to keep it focused, or would expanding it to beyond OOPS top 10 or 15, 20, or maybe a more helpful? So what he's saying is that like we should run with the OOPS top 10, or it should be like OOPS 20.
I can share my take. Not a pen tester, so this is coming more from the business side. But I see all of these as guidances. OWASP top 10 doesn't mean that you will only test the application based on these findings that are general. It just says that these are the findings which are most commonly reported in the past pen test reports, and these are the most findings that you should be aware of. So expanding it, you could make it 20, you could make it 30, but that would not really improve the quality of OWASP top 10. The main purpose of OWASP top 10 is to provide the guidance to the pen testers that, hey, these are the findings that we are receiving the most or we're seeing in the industry. Make sure that you have covered your application at least for this top 10. It doesn't mean that you have to cover only for this top 10. So I would probably not go beyond top 10. That's my personal take as a non-pen tester. When I see it from the business side, it just makes me uh, focus on this top 10 issues which are most commonly reported in the applications. And I would probably stick to it. I would to add, I would propose that whenever we are engaging with the pen testers, let's try to give a very thorough demo to them. Let's make sure that they truly understand the application, give them the test accounts, give them all the functionalities that we're going to release. And I think that would be a lot more impactful for the pen test as a whole than having OWASP expanded from 15 or 10 to 15 or 20. Mario, what do you think?
I think 10 is just right. It could even be less. It could be also like a top 5 or a top 3, or there could be like a top 5 and a top 3 that is like more frequently being updated or something like this. And I also think that the OWASP top 10 is the greatest thing that OWASP has ever created, because it manages one thing that other methodologies have not yet managed, and that is to squeeze something extremely complex, that is information security, web security, etc., into something that is understandable for people who don't have the attacker or the infosec mindset. And it uses a list for this. Everybody loves lists. Lists are easy to remember. Lists are easy to go through. Lists are easy to complete, etc., etc. So I don't think we need to debate about how many items should be on the OWASP top something, but we should agree that this is the way how information security people can communicate to other people who are not in the same field what is a priority and how to best describe and categorize it. So I think 10 is just right. If it was for me, it could be less than 10 because it might be easier for some people to remember. Because 10 is already quite a lot, but no more than 10. If it's like the OWASP top
Yeah.
50, then you would lose most people and you would be out again and not really make the progress that you anticipate from it.
Wolf 50 is like, unimaginable. But, Mario, you need to bust some of the myths for this. Some of the folks maybe from the industry. Few people say, okay, we go beyond OOPS top 10. What does that mean?
I mean, you have all that kind of stuff that is not necessarily in there, and it's again like context-dependent stuff. Maybe time of take, time of use, or complex race conditions, or complex logical issues. I know that most of them are somehow mentioned and referenced there, but it can go beyond because while the top 10 is great for the categorization and for communication, it might also be a limiter. And if you see this as a limit, and if that actually limits your testing activities, and you say, I only do the top 10 and then I'm done here, then of course one would again be missing the point and not doing it right. So it should be seen as what it is. And that is like a communication tool to show to other people who not necessarily have the mindset what web security means and what to look out for. But there's always more that needs to be considered, and it shouldn't be the framework that limits you, but rather that enables you, and you can take it from there.
Right. That really makes sense here. There are a lot of other factors. I'm able to recall a couple of things that I used to hear from a lot of customers. Shobit, specifically, have you seen any APIs which is publicly available in maybe in your client side in JavaScript or anywhere else, and that being got reported? Like,
We
there's a
don't have any public APIs. So that's one thing, that we don't have any public APIs, so it doesn't really impact me. But I often see when I speak to different individuals in the team or different members in the community that they do report the API is public, but it's meant to be public, and that's how it's supposed to be. So, and same with webhooks, they are meant to be public, some webhooks, and they are supposed to be integrated. I don't know why those are being reported. And again, I'll go to the same thing, that it's really important to understand the context of why something is public before they are being reported into the report.
Yeah. But Mario, do you think that the public Google API key is really value adding in the Pentest report? Just like Shobit mentioned.
If it kind of yields a security problem or somehow leads to a security problem, sure. But in most situations, it's more like a resource problem with like resource overuse or something like this, or something comparable. So I would, without further ado, not see this as a security issue. Not saying it couldn't become one, but in most situations, I would be saying, no, that doesn't really have any form of security impact. It might have other impacts, who knows, but security not necessarily. And if it still does, then it's definitely worth a ticket. But that should again be something that is determined by the testers and communicated to the client, and then they should decide what's the best thing to do.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. And I think Pentester, if you're listening this, probably like, you're wasting your time. And the moment you're wasting your time, probably, the ticket being reviewed, customer is looking at that ticket, the developer is looking at the ticket. At the end, it's wasting a lot of folks' time. So I think we should not report that for sure. I mean, this is not
Exactly.
for the pentester, it's lesson for everyone. Those who are looking at the ticket, they should not look at this as an accepted ticket. Mario,
And
yeah, go ahead,
just
please.
a quick apologies, just a quick add-on. I mean, if in doubt, just ask. I mean, during the pen test, you're very much likely connected to your client as a tester, and you can ask them questions. Just ask them. Like, you notice something that appears to be fishy to you, and you're not really sure if it's an issue to them or not, just ask them. Just like reach out, ask them, save everybody's time, because it could be one question, one answer versus sitting down, building a proof of concept, writing the ticket, sending it to editing, having it go into the report, sending over the report, having people read the ticket, having people wonder. That is so much time. Just ask, and then you get an answer, and then you can move on and do the right thing. And again, deliver value.
Yes. And the end of
I'm
the day, like,
thinking,
yeah.
I'm thinking that many pen test companies, that when I speak to them, they have a checklist of things that they will check, and they often send this over to us for review. I would propose that maybe going forward, companies can also create a list that this is what we're not going to report
We get this
because
quite a
it
lot
doesn't
actually.
any value.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
we
think
actually
that
do
would.
get this in briefings where the client explicitly instruct us to not report certain kinds of issues. And sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't make sense, but we often, not often, but just like frequently get them, and then we try to respect this as good as possible. But it might also be that this limits you like so much that you find something that could become exploitable, but you're not exploring any further because you already have read the requirements for the test and didn't kind of go down that rabbit hole. So it's a bit it's a bit of a risk behind this. But that happens, and it's actually not that infrequent to happen.
Exactly.
Right.
Any scenario, Mario, like, do you recall, like, let's say, just an example, HTTP only, or any of the other vulnerability that doesn't really make sense and that you want to explore here with the context?
I mean, there are so many, and it really depends. I mean, headers are one thing, right? Like we already spoke about the X powered by / any form of version leakage or version headers in the responses. But there's so much more that comes with headers where you might say, like, well, is this really an issue, or is that not an issue? Like XSS protection or something like this, which is one of the headers that is like really dear to me because I know a lot about this particular header, if one could say this.
I know.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's just like crazy what kind of past this header had, what it has, and how many people are still confusing it and have absolutely no idea what it really does, but still put it in the report, and then it has impact on the other side. So I would say that is like probably one of the most debated headers, and rightfully so. And we probably have seen like tons of tickets that make absolutely zero sense and have exactly 0 calories all around that particular header.
Right.
From the business side, I would definitely be pissed if I see that is being reported in the pen test, Mario and Sandeep.
Fair.
Yeah.
My thinking is that if I have to test for HTTP only, I can just put the URL and put that in SSL Labs, and that will give me the exact same result that you are giving to me. Why would I spend another 50K just to receive that finding? So from the business side, I would probably not encourage that to be reported. It could be informational, but definitely something that will go in the finding as finding. I would not encourage that.
But that's a potential issue that pentesters are reporting. But what about, like, things which is obsolete now? XSS header is, I believe, obsolete, right, Mario? It's
Meanwhile, it's fair to say that it's like more or less obsolete, but it was very relevant a couple of years ago.
yeah.
And there was times when you had to set it to 1, so to make sure that the protection is enabled. And then there were times when you had to set it to 0, so to make sure that the protection, which wasn't a protection after all, but actually tearing new holes into your application security compound, was deactivated, so you would be safer without the header on. And it's a crazy one. And if you didn't get the news on any of those stations that the header had as a journey, then you might do the wrong thing. So a couple of years ago, more than a decade ago, you would say it has to be turned on. Then something happened, and then it had to be turned off. And then what happened was actually mitigated, so you could turn it on again. But then the XSS filters in the browsers got deactivated, so you could turn it off again, or just omit it to save some bytes. So yes, you needed to keep track on this header, and some people maybe didn't, and then you would find tickets in reports that either made no sense or actually made things worse if implemented. And yeah, definitely an interesting path with this one.
Yeah, I think the headers are the top priority for pentester, but I think from this onward, maybe they will deprioritize this header thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think that, Shobir, it's informational, all of those header, or just few of them are informational? What do you see from that severity perspective? Because I have seen in the pen test report, not from our side, but maybe from other lot of pen test report that I look at publicly, I have seen like elevated severity for the headers.
I believe Sandeep and Mariam, please correct me if I'm mistaken here. I'm coming again from a non-technical background per se, but I believe modern browsers, they are made in such a way and they are processing the headers in such a way that many of those risks are already eliminated by them.
Right.
So I don't think all of those headers are critical at this point of time. And I think many modern browsers that we have right now, they take care of it. So For example, if like a TLS is outdated, it will give you a warning. You don't need to worry about that. If you want to proceed, you will. But if not, then you know that that is already the browser is already taking care of it. So
Right.
I think that's something that to keep in mind before those reporting those in the report. That am I
Yeah.
reporting something which is not already public or the client cannot see? So that's where my thinking is, that it depends on that. If something is already being taken care of by the browser, then please don't report it.
What about you, Mario? Like, do you see that the severity is being elevated?
So I would really have to think back for a long time to remember the last time we had a ticket in a report that was about headers and it was not informational severity. Do we file those tickets if we find something that is worth reporting? Absolutely. Is it in most cases informational severity? Absolutely. But maybe it's also inspirational, because if you think about, for example, like the cross origin headers that have been introduced by Chrome a couple of years ago, and most people just really don't know about them or have no actual idea what they actually do and how they can be useful, then you can have like an informational slash educational ticket in your report that basically says, look, this header would help you in this particular niche case, in this particular scenario. So if that is something that you would consider as a risk, then maybe just like implement that header, because it doesn't hurt otherwise. Another example would be X content type options, which was long believed to be a header that is only respected by Microsoft Internet Explorer and no longer necessary after Internet Explorer thankfully vanished. But it was not the case, because if you knew a little bit about how browsers worked in detail, you would also find out that other browsers respected this header as well. And there was very interesting niche scenarios where a browser would have extra vulnerability to cross-site scripting or render websites to be more vulnerable to cross-site scripting if that header was missing just because of this one particular browser. And then you need to also consider the browser versions and theoretically look into what kind of versions the users of that particular site are using. So it quickly gets complex again. But
Right.
at the end of the day, and bottom line, most of the header-based issues are indeed informational issues, inspirational issues, educational issues, and should be treated as such. But we should also
Right.
not forget that there might be situations where this is not the case, and then it's again about context, experience of the tester, experience and ability to exploit this. And then, of course, you want to raise a ticket that's like a little bit higher in severity.
Oh, that really makes sense. Like you mentioned about your expertise, right? So header definitely and your browser things are you're really expert in that. Uh, One quick scenario in my head as of now, which you probably like you can answer that, Mario and Shobit, if you want to chime in that as well. Um, so let's say there is a stored accesses found in one of the panel, uh, which is like found by the lower user, and the stored access is giving you pop-up of one, but it's not really accessible by the admin or any of the users. How do you see that stored access is being reported as a high?
It depends, because it kind of seems to be something that is similar to like self-XSS, where maybe you can only exploit yourself, or maybe you can only see this in your own account, or maybe you can only kind of reach lower privilege accounts with that. But then if you combine it cleverly with, like, for example, a login CSRF or something like this, then it might be that you can social engineer the targeted person into actually executing that JavaScript in their session, believing that it's their own session with their own account, but it's really yours. And then the only thing that you need to do is produce like a login form, wait for the autocomplete of the browser, and get access to the username and password in plain text. So even those kind of issues can be exploited nicely if the stars are aligned the right way, which brings us back to the maturity level of the testers and auditors. Can they spot that? Can they make a working exploit out of that? Is it an info or is it a critical? Because it could be both. And we have seen this countless times, specifically with self XSS. So you're going to be on your toes and be clear about what is possible in browsers and how you can trick your victims with attacks like this into navigating to places they would never navigate to, just all done by JavaScript. And then maybe the info becomes a crit. Who knows? Like, we have seen this in the past. So one needs to be
Yes,
wary here.
great. Shobit, you want to add it? Anything on that? I think
Yeah, I would again go back to the same thing, that what's the impact of that pop-up when they're doing the accesses? If as an end user, I'm able to see that and I'm able to see the information for the users or something. I don't know, any confidential information, that would definitely be high. But if it's not revealing any information, then I would probably not report it as high. Yeah.
Right. Makes sense. That's really great front, right? But Mario and Shobit, both of you, there is a gray zone also, right? Specifically, if I talk about gray zone, a lot of folks misunderstand the stateless protocol JWT token, right? They usually don't get expired, right? And many of them report, okay, it has to be logged out. So how do you see this problem? Like, do you see that should be on the report or not really?
I would use Shobit's words from earlier, and it really depends on the impact. It really depends on what can you do with this. Can you do bad stuff with this? Into the report it goes. Can't do any bad stuff with this, or nothing that is like significant from a security or privacy risk perspective, then you can just ignore it because it would be empty calories at the end of the day.
Shobit, have you anyone forced
Yes.
you like fix this because it has a long expiry? Not from the headspace, but maybe from any other experience that isn't coming in, and they are very very
We,
adamant
we,
about that.
this is so timely, Sandeep, and we do see that all the time. Think of it as a like for Headspace, we are a mental health company, which essentially means that we want people to log into the application, and we don't want to be asking them to log in every time they want to use the application. So intentionally, the login period that we have in the application are longer than the general applications. For example, if you consider a banking application, the login is like 5 minutes, which is okay. You are storing all your personal information, you are storing your financial information, and so on and so forth. For Headspace, it's only meditations. So even though we have a longer durability token, which will keep your session active, it's not necessarily a risk. You are using that just to conduct meditation, just to have some sound tracks or some let's say music to relax yourself. So it's not necessarily a risk to the user. And same for other applications as well, like Amazon, they don't necessarily log you out every 24 hours. You will continue to have access to Amazon. Then that's the risk that they have accepted that, okay, we want people to get into the application easily, buy stuff easily, and we don't want to be one of those folks who will log them out every now and then. However, if they do see a behavior where I'm asking or I'm logging from new device, then maybe they will log me out from my current application as well. And that's like a compensating control that they have built into the application. So it really depends, like Mario mentioned, that okay, what's the application doing? Is it really going to be impacting the uh, the risk to the application if they have a longer durability token or not? So depends. The answer depends here.
Great. So, I mean, there is one question coming here from Mike Jones. Any one of you can take up this. How do you ensure business context is factored into severity of a finding? So, how do you ensure business context is factored into the severity of the finding?
Briefing, have thorough kickoffs, make sure that the testing team understands the application, understands impact, understands the data that they're housing, etc., etc. It's all about being prepared. If the testers don't know this in advance, it might be that they're inexperienced, but it might also be that the kickoff was bad and that the client didn't get across the message properly to the testers so they can understand what is going on. So this is like crucial here. You need to make sure that everybody who's involved is properly briefed and really understands profoundly what is going on and what certain bugs have in terms of impact and severity levels.
Yeah, I can try to answer the question as well, Sandeep. That the question is really asking that AI is favoring both the attackers and defenders, and in the near future, what could the defenders do to make sure that they are ahead of the attackers? And I have two thoughts on this. First is when we were at RSA, I think it's still in the very infancy stage, Sandeep. Everybody was talking about the AI attacks and so on and so forth. And I think everybody is just guessing what could be the worst here. Nobody really has an idea. So that's one thing that a lot of it is going into guesswork. And then secondly, the second part of the question is that, okay, would it be favored in favor of attackers or defender, and what's the most critical step that organization should take today? I think I, coming from the business side, we are releasing features which use AI heavily. We recently released Ebb, which is like a mental health companion. And a couple of things that we do is we really make sure that when we release that feature out, we do a thorough internal pen test even before we release it to anybody across the company or across the headspace population. And that internal pen test, it gives us the ability to make sure that we distill any risks to the bare minimum and then make sure that all of those are catered before we roll those application features out. Once we conduct the internal pen test, we also have a feature external pen test where we have experts who are experts in breaking into applications. And then they try to break into the applications via their automated tools, via their custom scripts. And then they come up with and say that, hey, you can improve the prompt that you have in the application, or you can improve the data that you are using for training your model. And I think those are a couple of key things that we could do to improve on the defender side as well, and not just think from the lens of the attacker.
Makes sense. I think that was the question from John. Thanks, John, for asking. Shobit, I think here's one thing just I want to, before we open up full for the questions and the, rapid round. What if you receive a report which contains more than 30 plus informational and low, and a couple of them are like, medium and high? How do you digest that report?
This is a good question. That what would I do if I receive 30 informational?
Maybe 30 informational and low.
Maybe they are repeated. If we have those many lows and informational, then I don't know. I will not be excited for sure to see those many highs and those many lows and informational. And one of the things that I always tell my team is that when you're doing the pen test, let's just make sure that we have at least one critical, one high, or one medium. That's like that will justify the credibility of the report that you did some hard work in finding the findings. I will have a mixed emotion right there. Yeah, if we have a lot of lows and informational which are not helping us in any way, then I would probably discard them. If they are helpful to us, then I'll probably accept it.
Okay, makes sense. So I think let's begin into the rapid fire. Rapid fire. It's mostly like I'll give you the question or maybe input, and you can just say one word like report or ignore. Report, that means the report is going to get into the report. Ignore, that means don't actually get into that, right?
Can we
And
also
you don't.
say it depends?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Context depend. Yes, I think we should have that context. Yeah, depends. Right. So let me start with Shobit and Mario. You can take that any one of that. But audience, you have option to ask question, and we next 5 minutes we are going to spend some time on the questions from the LinkedIn audience and also Zoom audience. Feel free to put as many as possible questions here. All right. So here we go. The first one: missing HTTP only on UI theme cookie.
It depends. In most cases, probably it doesn't really matter, but there could be situations where it actually does. If you consider that HTTP only might also be interesting to keep the cookie away from the JavaScript space and only have it on the network stack, which could be interesting for like Spectre meltdown based attacks and something like this, which lots of people don't consider, but in most cases, don't report.
Shobit, you want to report or
From my
ignore?
experience, yeah, ignore.
Ignore. Right. Autocomplete on the name and address field.
Ignore. I mean, it might
Yeah.
be, it depends, but I would say 99.99% ignore. We don't report those.
Ignore. Shobit?
Yeah,
Ignore?
ignore.
No. So this is a tricky one. You can see the static HTML of admin panel, but you can't do anything.
You want to go first? Because I know already what to say.
Yeah, I would perhaps mark it as report in this case because it could lead to phishing or any of the other scenarios. So I would probably mark it as report.
It
Okay.
depends. I mean, if there is interesting information about the structure of the admin panel, as in like this is how the links look, this is how the link structure looks like. There's predictability in there. You could initiate for like a CSRF attack or something like this against the admin. Then it's something that might be bad. But it could also be that there's like no actual information in there. So if the structural information that is being leaked is of any value for the attacker to conduct a follow-up attack, definitely report. If there's nothing in there but an empty HTML or a couple of style sheets, then you can ignore it.
Great. All right. So no captcha on profile update, and the profile update is after the authentication. It's a post authentication. Do you want to report
Ignore.
that? Ignore?
I think
Mario
captchas are
said
stupid. Ignore.
Yeah, it depends. I don't know, man. It depends. More often than not, let's say if I'm on the application, in this case, let's take the example of a banking application. I'm updating some of the confidential information. Then I would probably want to see that we have a captcha and some sort of rate limiting there. Because if I get the initial password, I should not be able to update the profile without any further authentication. So I would
Yeah,
probably mark it as depends.
depends.
Every time
I
you
would
use a captcha, a baby robot cries, and captchas are bad. We can do better than that. So let's get rid of captchas in the first place and not report this.
Okay, this one is a favorite, Mario's favorite. Okay, a missing XSS protection header.
No comment. No, just
Yeah,
absolutely ignore.
yeah, ignore. It's
Ignore.
irrelevant in 2025. I don't think that it's relevant
Exposed.
anymore.
Lots of me in the past.
Okay, the next one is exposed API key for Google Maps or anything like that. So Google Map is on top of my mind. So yes,
It depends.
depends.
Can you
Shobit?
cause damage? Report. Can you not cause damage? Don't report. Is it a huge mega corp that is behind this who don't really care about their bandwidth? You don't have to care. Is it a small startup or like an NGO that really needs to kind of watch their bandwidth and can be put out of business if someone exhausts the resources? Then report it.
Yeah, I agree with Mario. It depends on the application.
Okay. Okay. Last one. SSRF on Open Redirect.
You could make something nice out of this. If you have like a nice attack path in mind, I would consider this report worthy.
Yeah,
Okay.
same
Cool.
report.
All right. So there's one question aligned to this. What are the valid reasons for rejecting a pen test finding, and what should that rejection process look like?
That's a complex question. I have a response from the pentesting perspective, but Shobit, maybe you also have one from the client's perspective, and you want to start because that's a controversial topic and can lead to drama.
Yeah.
It's a really good question that what are the valid reasons for rejecting a pen test finding and what should the rejection process look like? I often go back to this topic that if it's not impacting the application or the user risk assessment in any way, then I probably not reject, but go back to the pen tester and ask them for additional information that what was their thought process? Is there anything that we're missing at this point of time that we should be looking at? So I would probably not say reject altogether, but if we determine that something is reported as critical and it's not critical, I would maybe go back to them and ask for their rationale for reporting that as a certain severity. If possible, I would adjust the severity at the first place, that it's not critical. We do understand that this is something that could be reported, but let's adjust the severity if possible. And if it's I the rejection process, like just make sure that it's not impacting you or your business in any way. And when you determine that it's not, you confirm with the development team and go back to the pen tester with the rationale, saying it's a false positive, and probably they would move it to informational or remove from the report altogether. So that would be my thinking. First, make sure that the severity reported is the severity that the finding is causing. If not, adjust the severity. If the severity is completely out of the box, then let's just move it to informational or remove it from the report.
Right.
Got it. I'm going to say something radical, which is probably just right for a platform like LinkedIn. Any reason is valid. If a client says this and that is the reason and stands behind this, then literally any reason is valid. The question is what happens next? There are two pathways. The first one would be to remove the ticket. And that is something that, in my opinion, never can happen. And over the course of the entire history of Q53, we have never once, not a single time, removed a ticket from the report. Not once. But what can be done is just like leave the ticket in the report and add a note. And the note might say, well, this was reported by our testers, and when we believe this is an issue and we believe in the severity, Or it could say, we don't believe in the severity anymore after learning a couple of contextual information about this particular issue, and we decided to lower the severity. But most importantly is that there is a client note that says, look, we, the client, acknowledge that the ticket was written and created. We're not going to try to make it go away because that wouldn't make any sense for the sake of completeness of documentation. But we add a note in which it says, we do accept the risk for this and this reason, or for no reason at all. We just accept the risk. The important thing is that a ticket, once written, cannot be removed, but everybody should get a voice. We already had our voice as testers by filing the ticket, so we're already good here. We have it in the report. But the client also deserves a voice. And their voice might be, we saw the ticket, we acknowledged the ticket, we have decided to challenge it, and it's not important to us, so we're not going to fix it. And then we're probably going to be fine with this, which means we have a voice and it's not being silenced. The client has a voice and it's not being silenced. Everything is fully documented. And at the end of the day, future generations of IT managers or testers can decide whether this is or was an issue, might be an issue at some point. But it's up to them because they have all the documentation, all the information that they need. So, bottom line, anything can be a reason for rejecting a ticket. No ticket should ever be removed from the report, but every ticket that is being contested should be enriched with additional comments and notes and metadata to kind of clarify exactly what was going on, what the process looked like, and what the resolve was. And then you have everything that you need. Complete documentation, no one gets silenced, and everybody's happy, and there's still value.
Great, great. I think that's really a good point. Even we follow with that secure lesson in the similar process here. Yeah, I think that's really good one. I think the next question that I have here, is there any framework or checklist that team can use to decide whether it accept or reject a pen test finding? I just want to put one point here, like we are trying to collect all this data and information, but I would say it's really aligned to context of the application, context of your business. So probably this may help you to decide low hanging fruits, but the complex issue needs to be discussed in more in detail. Like anything that you want to add, Mario, apart from this, and Shobit?
I'm not sure about this one. Like a framework could be specific to or the checklist could be specific to the company. And we briefly discussed this, that companies, they currently have checklists on the issues that they will report. When I worked for a large bank, they had a checklist on things that they tested for, but they did not have a checklist for things to reject, or they did not speak probably directly with the customers on figuring out, okay, these are the reports that the findings or the issues that are not important to you. So it could be specific to a company, but I'm not aware of any framework that exists in the industry as a whole, which would say, okay, reject this, accept this. I'm not certain about this. Yeah.
I mean, we have CVSS and those kind of things, like the scoring systems, and maybe the testers would use CVSS from their perspective on things, and maybe you can use it from your internal perspective on things, or you can come up with your own internal flavor of this particular framework. I think there are good frameworks out there. And if you really need a process with a framework attached to verify whether a finding needs to be addressed or not, then maybe the complexity level is already too high. It can still be done, but maybe then you should optimize your processes and create more clarity through simpler means than putting something massive on top and having it go through there, because that also raises the chance of not fixing something that needs to be fixed or fixing something that doesn't have to be fixed. And nobody wants that, of course.
Great. I think we are running out of time, but I just want to pick up this last question because it's a really good one. How do you deal with the findings that are technically correct but operationally infeasible to fix? Shobit, I think maybe you're seeing that more.
I would definitely keep this in the report if it's in the backlog, and probably ask the pen testers for their advice on fixing it. If it's incredibly complex and it will take a lot of time to fix, for example, if you have a dependency or framework altogether which is vulnerable, then we need to plan it accordingly, and we'll not be able to resolve it in the SLA that we define for ourselves. But I would definitely keep it in the report, and when I create the remediation report status for our leadership team, I would come up with a proper rationale that this is why it's in the report as a whole. We are working with the development team to keep it in this sprint, going for next quarter or whatever it may be. But I would definitely keep it in the report with a rationale on why we did not fix it for the leadership team as well as our customers.
Right.
I agree. And I also would like to add that probably as someone who receives the pen test report, you have both security tactics and you have security strategy. Like security tactics would be to fix all the issues that you have in the report that are actually worth fixing, that are actually impactful to your organization in a short term. Whereas certain findings could also be security strategy, as in, well, we don't want to fix this now because we can't add CSP right now, or something like this, or trusted types, but we're going to do this in the future, so we're going to use this particular ticket to remind us that this is like an important stepstone of our strategy, and we might just like address it in the next quarter or the next year. We have it on the roadmap, but not for now.
Great.
Right.
I
Yep.
think
Have it on the roadmap.
yeah. Varun, like, feel free to shoot the feedback. And meanwhile, like, Mario and Shobit, if you want to just go with the quickly, one or two top key takeaway for our audience, maybe that would be our end this session. But I would like to thank you for joining this call, and even for the attendees and the audience that has been joined from LinkedIn and the Zoom. Thank you for joining this. And let's focus on, top key takeaways. Meanwhile, Varun, feel free to shoot the feedback form. Like any one of you can take if
Yeah, I can start. From my experience, the initial mistake I made when I first started getting engaged is I did not focus on the business logic. And I thought that pen testers are going to find findings and they're adversaries and they're not with me. But over a period of time, I had changed my mindset that, okay, we are friends. I want to give you as much information as you need to make sure that you can do your job properly. But at the same time, I want to keep this open line of communication throughout the engagement. Mario alluded to this earlier that if you find something which is trivial, you can just shoot a note and let the team know that, hey, is this something that you want to report or not? I would say that have that level of comfort with the Pentest team. At the same time, work very closely with the development team and make sure that they have time in the next sprint to fix any of the critical or high. So one part of the equation is you're working with pen testers in getting the pen test done, which is good, but what with the findings? You make to have to make sure that somebody has the capability to go and fix. And if you don't work with the development team to make sure that they have all those in their sprints or their roadmap, then you're going to not meet your SLA, which is going to cause additional trouble. So that would be my takeaway, that work on both sides of the equation, make sure that you have a good relationship with the pen testers. At the same time, work with the development team to make sure that they have the capacity defined to fix any issues.
okay.
That's a very good one. I would like to add mine, and that would be it's all about people. Like, if you want to have good information security, you need good people. It's everything, and everything is absolutely always and every single time about people. Have good people, train them, teach them, motivate them, build culture. You can buy as much AI and as many scanners and as many tools and as many shoeboxes as possible that sit on your network and pretend to do something. It comes down to the people. Invest into people, not into technology, and then you're going to have a long life and a prosperous one as well. So that would be my top takeaway. And I'm using this because we ran into this like several times over the course of discussions with like the raising levels of complexity, with the context, etc., etc. You need people to handle all that. You need people to understand all that. And you need to make sure that the people who you're working with, that are working for you or with you, stay with you for a long time, because otherwise this is getting out of control. People, people, people. This is the thing that you need to invest into.
Yeah, I totally agree to that. And that's really good. And this is how, like, we would like to end this fight chat. Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Shobit, for finding some time from your out of busy schedule. And we are going to release, we already released, I think one of my colleague will be sending out what are the vulnerability that you should take care within the report. We should not be considering the report that will be there, but that is again the context level disclaimer. Maybe, like, you can just walk through with that. So that's it from our side, and thank you very much for joining this, and take care.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Thanks both. Cheers.